Hey everyone, you're watching CareMinds podcast. I'm your host Daniel. Today I'm talking to David Moore of Lucira Health, and we're exploring a topic of a product manager as a skeptical idealist, separations of concerns, and defining responsibilities for an R&D team, being at the intersection of different teams and talking to sales teams especially, and the importance of having your teams interacting with the end customer in order to understand their pain points better, PM trends that are happening, health tech trends that are happening, and not falling in love with the idea that you came up with initially when it no longer serves you. Hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. David, thank you very much for joining the podcast and finding time. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's Thanks for having me join you.
David, you've started your sort of like path, like bachelor's in science, cell and developmental biology, which is extremely interesting. But I'm also curious, what made you, like, when did you realize that you want to kind of like help shifting the industry in the product development realm? And what was kind of like the maybe set of events or a deciding factor for you to consider joining a product management team?
In my undergrad, I chose science because it was interesting to me. I enjoyed it, but I also saw San Diego as an up and coming biotech industry. This was in 1996 when I went to school, and it was just really taking off. And I enjoyed the science degree. I was actually in biochemistry. Organic chemistry was a challenge, and looking at the following year, having to take a full year of physical chemistry, I decided to make a small pivot to more of a biology focus rather than biochemistry, and that's what landed on cell and developmental biology. Um, really enjoyed working for a small company named Diversa here in San Diego, uh, developing enzymes for different agricultural, pharmaceutical, industrial purposes. But what I saw as a trend was a lot of great scientific minds, a lot of great scientific work, but not as much business guidance and people to help write a business case for some of these great scientific ideas. So that's when I kind of pivoted and started getting my MBA and changed over to the carpet land, as they say it, the business carpet land instead of the lab tile area. So that was what changed from biology to business.
Got it. Very interesting. And did you had a chance to sort of like try your initial sort of like product management skills at Cardinal?
Yeah, that was my first opportunity. I literally transferred from an internship there to product management of some software for their infusion pumps. So Cardinal Health, several different companies, Alaris Infusion Pumps was one of them. They eventually spun that out into a smaller company or a different company, CareFusion, which ended up getting purchased by BD, I believe. And I was in charge of the software, and it was really a trial by fire of understanding the hospital environment, uh, all the different software and complexities of the IT industry, and really being able to implement and send out a product that's going to be used across a hospital, especially on something as important as an infusion pump. So, helping to manage that software, traveling with our technicians, and actually seeing hands on, okay, I just released a new version of software for these infusion pumps. Sounds great, it's got new features, but what does that actually mean for the technicians on site at a hospital that have 500 pumps that they've got to go and put a compact flash memory card into and change the firmware on and update the software and implement these new features? So it was really a lot of education about what a product actually does in the hospital, the impact you have on the end users, and also the logistics of getting that product implemented in a complex hospital system.
Got it. And what was, in your opinion, more difficult? Getting to know the implementation of the product in the hospital environment, or talking to the technicians about managing that software?
There was never any enormous changes in the software, so that it was like starting from scratch. I think it was literally the logistical, physical implementation. Now, that's probably gotten easier since what that was 2006 when I was doing that. Things have become Wi-Fi enabled and automatic updates and such. But this was actually physically seeing, what does it take to bring all these infusion pumps down to the basement and update the software on them, and what are the patient rooms that need those infusion pumps right now going to do while we swap them out. We've got to have some upstairs still working with the patients and actually giving blood and drug infusions, and then we have to have some that we're updating. So that was the bigger challenge. Usually, there's a single point of contact for the software, um, and you can work with them on the update and the training and everything else. The other interesting challenge with that particular software was working with the pharmacists as well, because this was software that was designed to mistake in the infusion. So when a nurse is typing 10 milliliters per hour or 10 milliliters per minute, they don't accidentally hit an extra zero and infuse 100 instead of 10. And so working with the pharmacist to help them actually set those guardrails of what's the minimum that this drug should be, what's the maximum that this drug should be to avoid a significant mistake. That was also a challenge because they had to understand all the different variables that they could put in and exactly how to set those limits and minimums.
You were also I think, did you had a chance to also explore the decision making process in the organization and understand which place a product manager plays in that particular process?
Yeah, it's really needing to be a champion for your product, but also an integral, you know, epicenter of all the different interactions. For example, if you're looking at a portfolio of all the different modules that could go on that infusion pump, if we had a new oxygen sensor that was coming out, we had to prioritize the functionality of that on the software because that was a critical part of our portfolio and it had revenue attached to it. It had customers that were waiting for that functionality, as opposed to other things that for your existing product line you might really want to implement some things, but you've got to make some tough choices about what is or isn't in a software, prioritize where you spend your time and effort, and also try to get software out at a reasonable pace. So you really do have to be a champion for your product, stick up for what's the important things that you know from what you've seen in the field are critical, but then also juggle all the different priorities that are important to the entire um, product portfolio and the company as a whole.
Yeah, and speaking about portfolios, I think you also worked with multiple product managers in order to kind of like develop consistent, accurate projections that later could be used in those portfolios, presenting product pipelines. How did you go about managing multiple product managers being at that intersection, kind of like getting this information all together?
Both with managing a group of product managers as well as a product manager managing the team, it's so important to insist upon open, honest, transparent communication. Uh, you run into the challenge of uh, people want to have their product succeed. They want to be optimistic. Uh, they want to be positive. They want to have a can-do attitude, and those are all great things. But you also need to look at it and say, well, okay, yeah, I think I can do this in 3 months, or I think I can achieve this specification. Um, you also have to be realistic and open and honest so that everybody knows what's going on. Because if you think you can do it, but then you miss it, all these other dominoes have started to fall based on your timeline, based on your specifications, our marketing activities, our sales activities, our plans for trade shows, the R&Ds, plans for the next step in the process, manufacturing, sales numbers, finance numbers, everything can domino from that. So you really do have to be I like to, my favorite saying is I like to create ambitious but achievable goals. So you want to try and stretch yourself, but you also want to more often than not hit your target, rather than being so optimistic and so excited that you're frequently missing your target. And so if everybody's on the same page with that, then you've got all the projects that are working together. You can prioritize accordingly. If project A is saying that they can accomplish this with less people than they thought, then that's great. We can take those resources and put them on project B. But project A has to be honest that if they need those people to achieve their goals, then let's make other choices. And so it's not a binary decision. It's not if you can't do it, then your project isn't going to succeed. It's you be open and honest, and it helps the whole portfolio move forward.
Yeah. I definitely agree, and I think you've also brought an interesting point that understanding the consequences of your action, how it's going to impact different domains of the business and different departments of the business is extremely important and crucial, and also realizing that you are one of the responsible figures for that could also be, you know, a paralyzing thing, or also could be a liberating thing depending on if you know what you're doing. um Very interesting, very interesting. And you've trained as a lean six sigma kaizen leader, and you've conducted kaizen events. um Based on your experience, different tools are good for different things. Lean Six Sigma Kaizen, what is it good for? In which context it works best? And how do you know that it's being implemented correctly?
For Kaizen events, they're really, you need to look at it from the idea that this is something we can achieve in a week. So that's probably the most important thing for a Kaizen event. It's not something that's so large that you're going to be taking months to implement. You want to kind of lock everybody in a room for 3 or 4 days and come out with things that you can implement right now. And so, to answer your question, as far as what's a good target, um, for that type of event, it's anything that you just know that there's inefficiencies. You know that there's areas where we can focus and we can change that are going to be some low hanging fruit. But it's not as easy as just doing it. You really do have to have cross functional, everybody in the room. This sounds really easy until somebody raises their hand and says, wait a minute, you're not remembering, you're not thinking about this aspect or this part of the equation. So you need it to be something where you're willing to um, attack a problem, discuss the potential outcome, and also not have areas that you want to optimize that don't really need it. I think that that's also a common mistake with those kinds of things. Do you want to achieve 99.99% consistency and success of manufacturing of pen, of a writing pen? Well, probably not, because you're spending entirely too much effort to get to this Six Sigma level of efficiency. When what's the problem with having one out of 10,000 pens be fail? It's more expensive than it's worth. So you've got to also choose a problem that you're trying to solve that actually is going to affect the bottom line and is worth the effort to implement those things.
Simple statements, but always they always work. And at Agilian Technologies, you were responsible for the market analysis, product positioning, project coordination, and getting lots of data about the end customer. I wanted to ask you this. Um, what kind of facts about customers that you found out through raw data that didn't sort of like map with your expectation of what customer would want initially?
That was interesting, and there's a few different things I could comment on as far as the end users. You know, we were building qPCR machines, and the customers, when you interviewed them, they all wanted every different feature that the current market uh, qPCR machines had. They wanted things like hot start features. They wanted touchdown PCR. They wanted gradient temperatures across the heating block. But when you spoke with them, 98% of their usage of the product was just the basic setup, the different ramping temperatures for qPCR and run the test. They wanted, 5 target multiplexing, but hardly ever does someone go beyond a 2 target multiplex. So it's an interesting discussion where you don't want to alienate a customer because, hey, I want this cool technology that your competitor has. Well, how often are you going to use it? Once a year. Okay, but that's still going to be part of their buying decision. So you do need to take it into account. You need to have those specifications that some people are just going to say, this is a must-have for me. And sometimes you have to believe the data that it's a must-have, even if you in your heart knows that it's a really not that important a feature that very rarely is it going to be used. But you still have to listen to that data and make sure that you're, delighting the customers that you're targeting.
Very interesting. And how hard it is to sometimes remind yourself that the data is sort of like the ultimate decision maker. with regards to where the product goes. I mean, of course, you can interpret it in different ways, but it oftentimes, like you said, it does not really correlate with something that you think the product would benefit from.
I mean, it's always a tough balance. You do want to trust your gut, and you've got experience, you've got knowledge that you want to use to avoid mistakes and to make more things more efficient. Um, One of the things that I have always caught myself with, well, I can convince somebody that that's not an important feature. Well, you're not always going to be in front of them. Yeah, okay. When you have a conversation with someone at a trade show, they very quickly agree with you. Oh yeah, you're right. I don't need that functionality. But you don't get to be in front of, you're going to be in front of 1% of your customers at best. And even if you train your sales team really well and you create some great marketing materials, flyers and videos and calculators, you can, those are all things that can help improve the situation. But if the data is showing you that there's something really important, you probably don't want to start out with this big mountain that you're going to have to every time convince somebody that, yeah, you really don't need that. It's probably worth the time to go ahead and put it in, even if your gut says it's not that important a feature. But then you also run into the problem of you can run into the problem of analysis paralysis, and you need to include everything instead of getting a minimum viable product out there. So you also have to look at what your situation is. Is your situation that you need to get to market and you need to get started, either from a company revenue point of view or a new technology point of view? Or are you trying to hit the market and you're going to get 3 to 6 months of excitement because you've launched something new? And you've got to make sure that that excitement is got everything you need. And so we only get one shot at this. We have to wait until we've got the perfect thing to go up against competitor A. Um, so you really have to change what you would do based on the situation.
And how would you? I think you're also the right person to ask this question. How do you go about ensuring success with working with R&D teams, where the development could very easily go into the lane of infinite experimentation? And you've seen it lots of times where the scientists, if you give them enough room for things, that they would turn things into endless experiments. So how do you make sure that these sort of like activities lead ultimately to the success of the product and add to it in a positive way?
Yeah, it's a great question and something to always think about. I've got a little bit of an advantage there because with my science background, when I speak with an R&D team and you see the relief that comes over their face when they realize they don't have to explain to me what DNA is or how a protein works or some of those things, that they can say, oh, okay, great, you understand that. So you understand how hard this challenge that you put in front of us is. And so that is really a powerful thing. And I think that even if you don't have that in your back pocket and a deep foundational understanding, you can get some of that foundational understanding, and you can also ask when you look at an R&D team and you say, well, you keep telling me that this is really hard, but I don't. You're not insulting them by saying I don't understand why it's hard. You say, well, help me understand why it's hard. What is the actual challenge? Um, and being understanding and getting to a point with that. I mentioned earlier the open, honest transparency. You'll get to a point where the R&D team knows that you aren't uh, pushing for no reason. You aren't just focused on a deadline. You're actually listening to them. You care about what's going on, what their challenge is, and you start to get that relationship where you can actually start to say, okay, well, wait a minute. What if I move this barrier out of your way? Would that let you improve the performance or improve the timeline? Oh yeah, that actually could help if you can look into that. So um, it is an open understanding and not just a toss it over the fence and say, hey guys, here's the problem, solve it for me. I need it in 3 months. It's a discussion on when things can happen, and sometimes they'll surprise you. Sometimes you'll go to them with a problem that I went with my hat in hand to my software developers once. I said, guys, I'm really sorry. I just found out about this feature that we need to have. Uh, I'm hoping you can get it in the next release that's 6 months away. And they very quickly said, well, no, we can do a hot patch on that. We can have that ready next week. And shocked by it and pleasantly surprised. And so having that kind of relationship where you're a team and you're pulling on the same rope, and you understand them, and they and help them begin to understand you as far as why you're pushing for something.
At Inova, you developed sort of like videos, brochures, and artifacts for sales team also. I was wondering what that experience brought to you as a product manager, stepping outside and talking to salespeople. Because I've heard this, I think at Lenny's podcast, that the problem with aligning everybody and making sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to product development is that every department thinks of a product slightly differently. And you've had a chance to talk to salespeople and train salespeople within that organization. So please tell me, what was the experience like, and what did it taught you about the perception of a product?
It entirely changes the perception of a product. And one of the most valuable things I've been able to do at any company and with any product line is travel with the salespeople and see what the challenges are that they encounter, see what the pushbacks are, see what the objections that they've got to overcome, because it completely changes the uh, uh, the equation. And that's where the rubber meets the road. As much as we all want to be doing cool science and bringing cool products, they're only going to be successful and be able to make the next cool product if they can sell. And so, traveling with a sales team, training a sales team, learning to know what your sales team's capabilities are, and actually changing your marketing materials based on what their strengths are. If you know you've got 8 reps that cover the United States and they've all got a really great technical understanding, but not a great finance understanding, then maybe you need to create more calculators that they can use with the chief financial officer of a hospital system, so that they can actually express the financial benefit, or the true cost of bringing on a product. Um, and vice versa, if they've got great personal skills but not great technical skills, then maybe we need to create some videos with the scientists that know what they're doing, that they can play and use as a helper until they start to build up their scientific knowledge. So, and that really also goes back to what I was saying about being the intermediary, because the R&D team doesn't get a chance to talk to the sales team, and the sales team doesn't get a chance to talk to the R&D team. So the sales team doesn't understand. Hey, I've needed this last month. Why haven't we got it yet? And the R&D team says, well, why is it so important? I don't understand why they keep pushing for it, and what it's going to change. And so telling them, well, because it's going to increase sales by 10%. Telling them, well, it's because it's science that nobody's ever achieved before. And so being that intermediary that you can help each department understand why the requirements are there, why the push is there, and it helps everybody to again get on the same page and pull on the same rope.
Differences do stack up, and it's like extremely important to make sure that everyone is aligned and on the same page. And it's extremely hard, in my opinion, the kind of like bigger these separations are. And talking about the product prioritization, what do you think is kind of like the main deciding factor for a certain priority? And how often did you find yourself in a situation where you would have to pivot from the initial plan based on the data, and how important it is to not be kind of like attached to the initial decisions, but always think that the end product matters the most?
I'm kind of thinking of the dichotomy between a startup company and a larger company. And the reason I bring that up is because it really changes what you can or can't do when you make those decisions. If you're a startup company, you kind of need to be focused on and talking about the whiz bang, exciting, huge numbers that you're going to achieve product. And you can't talk about a lesser product that might be important or easier to get through the FDA, or one piece of the puzzle that is required to access this market. So when you're a bigger company, you can say, well, yeah, nobody cares about a C-reactive protein test. They're a dime a dozen. You can get them. They're cheap. They're available. Why on earth would you have that in your portfolio? Well, as a startup, it's really hard to explain. As a larger company, you're able to say, well, because we're going to be marketing to gastroenterologists, And even though we're not going to make a lot of money on this particular CRP assay, we need to have it. Otherwise, the gastroenterologist won't even give us the time of day. So you have to have little pieces of the puzzle that enable the larger pieces of the puzzle. So those are some of the factors that go into it, and it made me think of the difference that some situations you can focus on the whole puzzle, where others you have to paint the picture of, hey, this is why you should invest, and this is why you should um, realize that this technology is really exciting and wait another year for it, or uh, consider bringing it on onto your portfolio.
And I think it's also been in your experience that you've helped a company transition from a startup to a bigger company. And can you please tell, as a product manager, what sort of qualities do those companies typically look for when it comes to hiring product managers? And how did you attribute to that success?
I think that in the startup area, a product manager or a marketing person has to have a lot more. Obviously, in any startup, you have to be willing to wear different hats. Uh, but the smaller the company, the more that the marketing team has to be universal. So I've always talked about upstream marketing versus downstream marketing. And upstream marketing, I've been always considered that a little bit more in line with what product management is, but a lot of people think it's universal also. Um, but definitely in a small company, you have to be willing to do it all. You have to be willing to get on camera and create training videos. You need to be willing to travel to the sales team and train them. You need to create the brochures. You need to be able to work with vendors and creating web pages. But then all the other stuff about upstream product management is still there and still has to be done. Creating the requirements document, ensuring that the R&D team knows exactly what the product needs to be to be successful, um, monitoring the timeline and ensuring that things are actually happening according to plan. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is the smaller the company, the more you have to be covering the entire life cycle of the product.
Throughout your career, you've conducted extensive interviews, you've visited focus groups, you've talked to customers. How do you make sure that they're heard? And how do you establish, I guess, good communication with them to that, so that they trust you enough to talk about the stuff that they actually want a product to help them with?
I can think of two examples that I think are worth mentioning, and one would be when we were researching what different tests we might want to put onto a platform that we were developing, and so we were asking people what menu they would want, and never assume anything in a report that you've got, and especially if it's international and there's potential for a language barrier. We saw frequently physicians and lab personnel asking for a water infection assay. And we didn't know what that was. And we went for a little while, and the person that ran the interview didn't really know what it was. Eventually, we found out that this was the people we were talking to were in the UK, and a water infection is kind of like a water closet or a restroom. And it was a urinary tract infection. They just called it a water infection. We had never heard that term before. And if we just kind of gone with it and not asked the follow up question, we never would have realized that that was a really important assay to have on the platform. Um, Another was with a customer that, even customers that are, if you've got a good relationship with a customer and a sales team knows this and a salesperson knows this, um, you want to keep a close relationship, even with people that are refusing your product. I had a customer that was very friendly, willing to talk to us, but she insisted on never giving up my platform A for your platform. It's nice. I understand why you like it, but I'm sticking with this. It works great for me. I finally asked that person, can I come watch you run it? I just want to learn a little bit more about the competitor. I want to come watch you run this instrument. And when I went on site, she had forgotten I was coming. And she says, oh, I'm so sorry. You can stay and watch, but it's going to take me 90 minutes to get the machine up and running, to turn it on, get the fluids flowing, get everything set up. And I said, how often do you have to do that? And she said, oh, well, every day that I run the instrument, it takes me about 90 minutes to set it up. And I was blown away. I was like, that was, to me, a huge usability negative. I was working with our R&D team and trying to, we were in a 30-minute setup. And so I was saying, guys, that's too long. Customers are going to hate that. as soon as I found out that there were people out there perfectly happy with 90 minutes, I was able to go back to the R&D team and say, hey, 30 minutes is great. Stop working on that. Start moving on to something else. And those are the things that somebody can say they're perfectly satisfied and 100% happy because they just don't know that there might be something better out there. And so that firsthand observation is irreplaceable.
The ultimate success story is that that particular product received funding. And I was curious about what kind of tips would you give out there to the product managers who have a kind of like a similar goal set? What do you think would work best with those types of goals in mind? And what could be implemented right away, like universally across like different organizations that are pretty much looking to achieve the same goal?
You have to find the person at the company that is best at giving the pitch, and you have to work very closely with them and create the slides that are going to deliver that pitch and the key benefit in 3 minutes. I was going to say 5 minutes, but even 3 minutes. You really need to be able to say that hook. You need to be able to say, this is the secret sauce. This is what separates what we're developing from everything on the market. And there needs to be that exciting financial benefit. Now, you might be able to get away with RADX funding or Bill and Melinda Gates funding or other things without that financial benefit. You're just doing it for the benefit of science or um, uh, healthcare or what have you. But when you're talking about investment, you really got to say, what is your separation from the market? What are you bringing that no one else can bring? Why is it important? Hopefully it's inherently known, but why is it important? And then they want to see this big number, and it's a little bit disheartening. It makes you think that all you have to, you have to boost yourself up and you have to make things up and have these grandiose uh, uh, value propositions. And I don't think you need to go so far as to exaggerate or to be overly optimistic, but you do need to have something that's like, hey, yeah, okay, if I'm going to invest $20 million, there's going to be I can see a very consistent 100, 150, $200 million annual revenue coming from this type of company in 5 years. So that's what I think you have to have is the hook, the reason why it's cool, and the financial benefit.
And I think one of the best people to reach out to when it comes to creating such a pitch is definitely product manager.
So the thought that comes to mind there is that there's always going to be a little bit of pushback from the sales team that says, well, no, they don't care about that feature. Similar to we were talking earlier about, well, you got the data and you've got a gut feeling. And so you want to trust your gut, but you also want to trust the data. And if your sales team's saying, no, David, they don't care about time to result because it's just a set it and forget it assay. They don't care about it. It's like, well, my data says that they do. Now, the interesting thing in that situation is that the sales team probably has some pretty good real time data to back themselves up. It's like, yeah, well, I went leading with that feature of time to result being the coolest thing ever, and I didn't make any sales last week at all. That doesn't mean that that's a definitive answer, then, but it's a pretty good data point that says, they've got some evidence that it's not working. And so it's like, okay, what do we change? What do we do differently to try and make that be the feature that they care about? Or what do we lead with to get the information and get the appointment with that person? So um, I think that that's certainly something you can learn and not be closed-minded, not just say, well, no, 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 you're wrong. I'm sure you're just doing it wrong is the worst thing that a marketing person can do when they hear from a sales team that, hey, this isn't working or this piece of collateral isn't hitting the mark. Um, and so sometimes there's always going to be people that are just making excuses and not doing it right. But there's also a reason to adjust yourself to a salesperson's uh, um, specialties and strong points. If they're really good at expressing the science, or if they're really good at expressing the financial benefit, then help them emphasize those points and help them with collateral that's going to make up for the other weak points.
I was super curious to ask you this. Do you think that product success could be meticulously engineered through data, or In certain cases, you just work with different hypotheses, see what sticks, and afterwards you can attribute that success to data, and it's very easy to do. But the data was not kind of like the driving factor of why a certain feature made a product appealing in the first place. So I'm just kind of curious about your take on that. Of course, there is a method to a madness, and this is why you're there for when it comes to product development. But once again, if there is like a miracle happening, right? And you can always also attribute that to data later on to find a logical explanation why that happened.
Sometimes you can stumble on things, and sometimes it's a matter of, yeah, you know exactly what has to happen for there to be a chance. I mean, really, you're setting yourself up for a chance to be successful during the early upstream product development. You have to, based on the data, based on your customer visits, based on your sales, co-piloting trips, you have to say to yourself, yeah, this product has to be 98% accurate. It has to be 5 minutes or less. There has to be a few different stakes in the ground that you say that it's just absolutely non-negotiable, and the data is telling you that. And then there has to be some things where you say, okay, yeah, I'd certainly like it to be um, room temperature storage and not need refrigeration. But that's not a deal breaker. That's not going to change whether it's successful or not. And so I think that's where the data really has to give you a few musts that are absolutely non-negotiable. And then there have to be other things that it gives you that, yeah, you know what, it would be really nice if we could store at room temperature, or it'd be really nice if we could um, have 3 years of shelf life instead of two. Um, and that would be a competitive differentiator, and that's going to be a cool thing to put on a brochure or a flyer, or when you look at a competitive table, that's going to be something people gravitate towards. But you can't get them all, and so you have to focus on which ones are absolutely, the data tells you this is a must have.
Speaking about setting yourself up for success, what kind of habits set you up for success as a product manager?
Knowing your customer, and even when you're upstream, knowing your customer, and then also making sure that the entire team knows your customer. So what I mean by that is, an R&D team doesn't understand why it has to be a 5 minute assay. Take them with you to see that customer working, and how crazy their day is, and how many assays they've got going on, and how many samples are coming into the lab, and let them see, like, oh yeah, wow, okay, that really is important. So I think that that's probably, there's lots of things that you can try to be consistent with your goals, but they're always going to change a little bit. You want to have your requirements be as stable as possible. Set your R&D team up for success by having consistent, clear requirements from the beginning. There's always the chance that they're going to move a little bit. Um, Honesty, openness, all those things are all really important things. But I think that the best thing to set yourself up for product development success is knowing your customer, ensuring that everybody on the team knows the customer.
How easy it is to get an entire team with you to see how the end customer works?
Not always as easy as you hope. One of the things that's actually been quite successful for me, especially in smaller startups, is getting some of those early adopters and some of those early customers just on the phone for a little brunch talk, and having them telecommute into a meeting with the company. So then even the people on the loading dock, and the people working on a different project, or the people that are focused on finance and manufacturing, and they don't really develop the product, they still are going to see the benefit that they're bringing, the excitement that that customer has about it, that this person is willing to come chat with us and about it. They know that they're a doctor, and their time's valuable, but they're still willing to come talk to us. And so that's one way. Obviously, field trips if possible, so you can get everybody together and actually see it in person, are fantastic, but not always as practical as you might want it to be. So I think that that's a really good approach, is to have those early adopters, customers that are happy. Let everyone in the company see that. Let everyone see the benefit that their work is bringing.
Some of the maybe product management trends that you currently see happening, and some of the health tech trends and diagnostics you see emerging in today's market?
What kind of trends do I see? I think that there is an absolute dichotomy so for point of care testing, I think that it's a true, there's molecular and there's non-molecular testing. And the non-molecular is almost always a lateral flow antigen test, can be difficult to manufacture, have an unfortunate high false negative rate. Of course, it's all dependent on the test. Um, but it's just a challenge, and there's going to be some things that never can be done molecularly. For everything that is molecular, um, everyone's trying to beat that time to result and cost of test down to where it can be okay. Yes, both for financial and time reasons, I'd rather do a molecular flu test than a lateral flow flu test. But there's still not ever going to be a molecular test for things like proteins and antibodies so I see a ton of people working on that next gen molecular platform. I don't see quite as many people working on a next gen antigen platform. And I think that that might be something to be kind of cognizant of, because if somebody creates that amazing 5 or 10 minute molecular platform, there's going to be a demand for now I need an antigen test that's quantitative and 5 minutes and accomplishing some of the things to partner with that really cool molecular platform.
Your professional hazards, things that you've noticed about any given business that you come across in your day-to-day life. You come at groceries, you like visit different people that are running different businesses, and as a product manager who advocates learning inside and outside of a business and learning the customer, what are the things you typically look at any business that
So I think both internally and externally, you have to understand the motivation of the party that you're working with. So if you're working with a customer, you've got to understand, is their motivation to get results faster? Is their motivation to keep the assays in the central lab and not let them get out to the point of care? Is their motivation to improve accuracy? Is their motivation to reduce hospital acquired infections? And all those different things can be different motivation. One could be a very big motivator for the doctor, one could be for a lab manager, one could be for the CFO of a facility. So you've really got to understand their motivation and what their um, yeah, literally motivation. What is their motivation? And then you bring that right back internally. When you're talking with the CEO, what is his motivation? Is his motivation just to move the stock price this week? And don't be afraid to ask that. At one point, I was working with the CEO and I said, hey, he asked if we could have the debut of two different platforms at an upcoming trade show. And I said, oof, it's going to be tough. We could pull it off. What's the value? Why do you want to do that? Well, we're going to have a few investors there and it's going to be really important and it has a real chance to move the stock price. And that would be very helpful for X, Y, or Z. Okay. Yeah, let's do it. Let's make that the priority for the next 3 months. But don't be afraid. Don't just take it and say, God, I don't know why they want to do that. And I don't know if they really realize how hard it is. Um, let them know that this is a challenge. It is going to take a little bit more resource. It wasn't planned before, but is it? So once you've said all those things, is it worth it? And if you get yes, or you get told what the motivation is, then you say, okay, well, let me go develop a plan and tell you whether it's possible. So um, I think it's perfectly fine to have those questions of what is your motivation. If you don't really believe that a sales rep is going to sell 100 more units this month than they did last month, don't go ahead and ask them. Say why do you think? Oh, well, because I had a whole bunch of sales that were rolling over from last month to this month, or didn't have access to children's hospital before, now I do, or I want to do it because it's going to hit my bonus. And if I do it, then I'm going to have a big bonus this year. And if I don't, I'm not. Okay, well, that still helps the company, and let me help you. If you've got somebody that's got motivation that's in the same direction as you, so maybe you can spend a little extra time training them and helping them to achieve that goal that you might think is ambitious, but if you've got time, you can help them achieve it. So um, I think that's a critical aspect in both internally and externally is understanding people's motivation.
Couldn't agree more. David, thank you very much for being a part of this episode. It's been a super interesting, insightful conversation. David's LinkedIn profile would be in the description of this episode in case if anybody is interested in reaching out for network. David, once again, thank you very much. You've watched CareMinds podcast. I was your host, Daniel. This is David Moore. Until next time, thank you.